Well, the other day we were talking about, people are always talking about the other realm, the non-physical, and some people don't believe there's any such thing. Other people think there is, but argue over the nature of it or how you get there or anything like that. And so I just decided I'd go look up some terms today, and was the one on defining naturalism, because you can't really talk about the supernatural until you talk about the natural. And
Mhm.
what they got there, this is from definition from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. You can probably tell by the link. And it says, a theory denying that an event or object has a supernatural significance, specifically the doctrine that scientific laws are adequate to account for all phenomena. So what they're saying is that it isn't just believing nature all there is, that it's more of a denial. Just like atheism is a denial, it's what doesn't exist, not what does.
Mhm.
So it's a limited subset of all possible worlds. And possible worlds is a philosophical idea called middle knowledge. Though it's just some people believe how, for example, God knows the future without causing it, is by this possible worlds idea. It's like when you play a game of chess, and with at the start there's a certain number, a finite number of possible moves, and every time somebody makes a move, the set of remaining possibilities changes. And a good player will be able to entertain the idea of several possible scenarios, sometimes dozens of them at a time with each move. And that's called possible worlds in philosophy. And so, what, in my opinion, naturalism is self-limiting in that it does not recognize any possible worlds but the one that exists that we can observe right now. And they call that, and they said it was a doctrine that scientific laws are adequate to account for everything. So I looked up, I wanted to make sure I had the current definition of scientific method, and that's to observe, hypothesize, and test. And observe is just watching what things do and writing, making notes about what we see. And then hypothesize is to try to guess what is going on with what we see. And then you are supposed to devise a test. And the purpose of a test is not to prove, but to disprove. It's called falsifiability. And in science, what you're supposed to do when you have a theory, in order to call it a scientific theory, is try to find ways to make it fail. And that's why, like for example, you take a car to the proving grounds. What the exception will prove the statement. The exception that proves the rule means that it disproves it. It tests it. That's what it means to prove. It means to test. In math, proof means a different thing. But in science, uh, falsifying something means you devise a way that you could possibly show this theory to be false or unworkable. So, in order to be scientific, a theory has to be falsifiable. So, there's falsifiability, and it's the belief, the quote there, the belief that for any hypothesis to have credence, it must be inherently disprovable before it can become accepted as a scientific hypothesis or theory. So, I'm not just making this stuff up. Um, so, that's naturalism. It's the idea that, or doctrine, they call it a doctrine, a teaching, that this falsifiability, this testing of a hypothesis, is essential to naturalism. That's what naturalism depends on. Okay. So supposedly naturalism is bound by this scientific law that you have to be able to find a way to disprove something. And this is why I don't believe evolution is a scientific theory, because there's no way to falsify it. People will believe in it whether they find things, anomalies, over and over again or not, such as viable blood cells in dinosaur bone marrow. I mean, if or what they call the oxymoron statement, living fossil, like the coelacanth and other things, where supposedly they've got this order of progression in the rocks, and then they find an exception that, the exception that proves or tests the rule, but they don't
Mhm.
abandon their theory. Therefore, it cannot be falsified. Therefore, it's not scientific. So this is purely logical, and by their own definitions, I say it's not scientific. Okay. Actually, I didn't define that. I defined naturalism, and the natural being the physical realm by anybody's definition I ever heard. So supernatural is beyond the natural, something that is not natural by definition. And here's again another link for belief. A quote there is, it's a belief in supernatural power and order of existence. So it has more to do with not just that there's some other dimension, but that there is an order in the universe because of it. What I would, looking at a bunch of definitions, what I would summarize it is as that supernatural proposes a non-physical intelligence as the first cause or creator of the physical realm, and asserts that life has meaning as assigned by that creator, and it observes order and complexity in nature and deduces that this requires design by an intelligence. So in other words, the supernatural is what a lot of people believe in because they see that the universe is orderly, and that order cannot come out of chaos by strictly natural processes without some kind of direction. That's another slam on evolution, in my opinion, is that evolution is supposedly an unguided process, and yet in order to say that there's an evolutionary progression is an oxymoron, because something can't progress if it's evolving by blind chance. I mean, statistically, if you ever took a statistics course, they'd have you do that tedious coin flipping experiment, and the more you flip the coin, the closer you get to 50-50 heads and tails. And so the longer time goes on, the less progress you have. You don't go to one side or the other, a heads or tails side. You get almost even, of flips. And so time is the enemy of evolution. Evolution has to mean, they would tell you it only means change. They don't say what direction, but evolutionary theory holds that life has progressed from simple to complex. But that can't happen statistically over millions of years of unguided process. You should reach equilibrium by now where nothing goes anywhere. And so that time, the magic wand of evolution and the Big Bang Theory is actually the enemy of it. So that doesn't make any sense to me. But philosophically, and here's, I guess, the main point I was going to get at, was there has to be a first cause of the physical realm, which we observe is running down. It's called the law of entropy, that things run from order to disorder. And that's what we observe. That's a scientific observation. So the physical cannot be its own cause. Nothing can be its own cause, because that would require it to exist before it existed. You can't cause yourself. Nothing can cause itself. So it must be caused by something else. So you go back in time to, effects and causes, and eventually you must reach a point where there's something that's outside of all the laws of physics and everything we observe, which caused all of this stuff. Because moving the goalpost doesn't answer the question at all, no matter how far back you go. So supernaturalism is just a philosophical conclusion drawing from what we observe in nature running down and not being able to create itself. So there must be a cause in another realm or dimension which made all the physical realm come into existence in the first place. And so to say that this can't exist, the supernatural can't exist, is nonsensical and absurd and illogical, because things can't create themselves. And we observe that nature is not eternal because it runs down. So I think naturalism paints itself into a philosophical corner because it's self-limiting. And when it comes to such as in evolution, where they want to date a rock, for example, and of course you have a certain instrument or process that you're going to use on this rock to observe the decay rate or something like that. But this rests on assumptions, not only about the initial conditions that they can't observe, but also the scale of time. It's like what I say when somebody wants to, if you wanted to naturalism is like taking a body temperature thermometer and trying to measure oven temperature. You know, the naturalist will not conclude, well, I've got the wrong scale. No, they will conclude that the oven doesn't get hotter than about 105 Fahrenheit, which is stupid. But that's what they do in evolution. When they want to determine the age of a rock or a fossil or something like that, they don't go necessarily just by observable facts. They go by assumptions, and one of the things they assume is the scale. And they can't do that in cold science, but that's what they pretend anyway. So I see naturalism as a very narrow dogma that arbitrarily asserts that all observations must be explained within the limits of the physical realm, and it requires a blind faith in the laws of science, that science will someday figure it all out. Anyway, I think that naturalism is like a religion, because it buries its head in the sand about how much every observation it makes must conform to its limits. It can't ever admit the fact that it can't explain the existence of the physical realm in the first place, because any evolutionist you talk to will say, well, evolution is only about change. We don't have to answer the question of origins. Well, you kind of do. That's a cop-out. I mean, you make us answer where God came from, you know, so you got to tell me where stuff came from. Double standard. I did a video on that. It's a double standard. They put, especially for us Christians, they put us under the spotlight on the witness stand for centuries, but never can you put them on the witness stand. No. We have to tell you what's wrong with your belief. We don't have to answer for ours. So that's just wrong. Yeah, so that's all I really had to say. I just thought I'd look up a few things about naturalist philosophy and why I think it's a religion and why I think it's self-limiting and narrow dogma, and a religion like anything else. It just, you know, doesn't have a deity, but it does have a priesthood of white lab coat scientists. It has dogma, you know, certain teachings you must believe, like naturalism. I mean, it's, you know, is itself a dogma. It has heretics. If you don't believe, there's something wrong with you and you should be excluded. You can go all down the list as you know, you get to the old saying, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you know, it sure looks like a religion to me.